Abby, are you ready to go?
Yeah, I think I'm ready to go. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, then let's get this party started. Welcome, everyone, to the Michener Art Museum's virtual program, Urban Environments in Art. This is a virtual lecture with our assistant curator, Abi Lua. If you've been to the Michener, you've seen that our curatorial department has been very busy. They reinstalled all of our permanent galleries, and the Commonwealth has a specific theme, a lot of industrial landscapes. So when Charlotte Schatz opened, we thought this was a perfect time to highlight the works from our permanent collection in connection with this exhibit. If you haven't been to see it, I would definitely encourage you to come. It's a beautiful exhibit. Um, so tonight, our program is going to be presented by Abi Lua. She's the assistant curator at the Michener Art Museum. She previously held curatorial positions at Bryn Mawr College, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and the Philadelphia Contemporary. She specializes in American and global craft and material culture, and her research has been supported by the Center for Material Culture Studies at the University of Delaware. Abby holds a BA in History of Art from Bryn Mawr College and master's in American Material Culture from the Michener Museum and the University of Delaware. So I'm going to turn this over to Abby. If you have any questions, if you can please enter them into the Q&A, which you can find, it's in your toolbar. So kind of depending on what you have, what kind of screen you're using, it'll be either on the top or the bottom. So if you enter them in there, we will be sure to answer them at the end of the program. So I turn it over to you, Abby.
Okay. Thank you, Jen, for that lovely introduction. Again, my name is Abi Lua, and I'm the assistant curator here at the Michener. Um, and let's see, can I go forward? Yes, I can. And Jen's introduction was so lovely that she said exactly what I was going to say about how this presentation came about. But just to recap, as many of you know, we have the show Charlotte Schatz, Industrial Strength up right now in our Beans Gallery. It explores the work of local photographer, artist Charlotte Schatz. She worked in the Bucks County region up until her death in 2023. And she's really known for sculptures, her minimalist sculptures like those on that sculpture island, which we like to call in our curatorial department, as well as very vibrant paintings of abandoned factories or other industrial buildings. And so you can see on the wall, they're really so vibrant against that black wall. And so I think the presentation slide did a really good job of recreating that. As you know, as Jen was explaining, she was thinking of programs that she wanted to associate with the show, and something that she likes to do is give me a nice curveball or challenge to combine the marquee show with other works in our collection or other exhibitions that are going on. And so, as Jen mentioned, we have recently reinstalled the permanent collection spaces of our entire museum. As you all know, we collect art across the Delaware Valley region. And so what makes that really fun is that we have a wide breadth of works from this region across multiple time periods. And so we're particularly known for our Pennsylvania Impressionism, but we also have a dedicated gallery to work from the modernist period, which is what you'll see pictured here. Many of our artists worked during this time period, which was around the late 20th century into the turn of the 21st century. And the themes that they explored were urban life, rise in industry, and then they also experimented with a lot of different artistic styles. So as Jen mentioned earlier, we have a lot of city scenes. And so as you can probably guess, that was the perfect tie-in to the Charlotte Schatz show. And so that is how this presentation came about. And so I just wanted to give a brief roadmap of what this presentation will look like and what you will expect as I walk you through the ways that the urban environment has inspired not only Charlotte Schatz, but also the artists in our permanent collection. And so I thought I would break it down in 4 different themes. I thought it would be fun to really just think expansively about what is an urban environment, what is a city, and just thinking about the ways that the artist captured all of these different themes and patterns in their work. And so for the first section, I will be focusing on materials. So really thinking really before, right, the built city, what are urban materials? What are materials of industry that these artists use and or that cities use, but then also how did artists co-opt these materials into their own works and their sculptures? After materials, we'll be really looking at sites of industry and manufacture. And this is really, I think, the bulk of Charlotte Schatz's oeuvre. She really focused on painting abandoned factories and other industrial sites in very vibrant colors. And we have a couple of works like that currently on display in our Commonwealth Gallery. After that, we'll be looking at residential city life. So really thinking about what are the buildings, what are the scenes that aren't of industry, but still reflect just the common urban experience of those who live in the city. And really, I think for our permanent collection, we have a lot of works that reflect this theme. And then lastly, we'll think about how not only Charlotte Schatz, but also the artists at the Michener thought about urban change. And so I was really interested in thinking about really not just not just the hustle and bustle of the city and of city life, but really thinking about like how cities change and how cities, rise and fall, how businesses rise and fall, and how artists capture that in a still moment, a painting or a work of art. And so that is what this presentation will look like for tonight. And to kick our material section off from the beginning, I wanted to begin with these 2 paintings by Letitia Maxwell Eli. Letitia Maxwell Eli was trained in a Pennsylvania Impressionist, was trained under that training. And so you can see the impressionistic brushstroke. But even though the Pennsylvania Impressionists were really depicting very idyllic scenes, a lot of them also depicted, sites of extraction or sites of quarry, right? Where these materials of like metal and ores and geodes, they would be found in these sites. And so here and these paintings are really small, actually. Here Letitia Maxwell Eli depicts really that labor in action and that extraction in action. And so you can't really see like the actual material of the metal or the rocks, but you can see how this is a scene that depicts the importance that material plays in infrastructure and in building society to come. And so just to kick us off with that painting, we can see how really in Schatz's early sculptures, she really thought a lot about materials. And so pictured here is circum circumflex. And so here Cheryl Harper writes in her essay on in the accompanying exhibition and catalog that in this sculpture, Charlotte Schatz really looks at the series or like sort of the transformation of aluminum through its many stages. And so here it's a series of aluminum spheres. And when you look from left to right, you see how the aluminum spheres metamorphize from a solid state to its molten state. And so not only is Schatz using like an industrial material, but she's really thinking about its materiality, thinking about how it will transform with heat and what it looks like when it is solid and then what it looks like when it is in a molten state. So really Schatz is engaging with the material of an urban environment. And then as we continue here, we can see, right, geode on the left is recalling the shape of a rock, of a geode. But really here with these 2 sculptures, Schatz is thinking about the way that light plays off of surface and off of metallic surfaces. And so, right, when the light shines on geode, it will refract and it will reflect off of its many plane surfaces inside. And then with light sandwich, you'll see that there is an LED light that is sandwiched literally in between two sheets of plexiglass or steel. And it creates this warm glow. And so not only is Schatz, again, using this metallic material, but she's really thinking about how can she create these minimalistic sculptures in a way that also experiments with the light that's available or the light that can be created through like an LED lamp. And then returning our permanent collection, what another or two new works that we brought into our Commonwealth Gallery are these two studies of more monumental sculptures that were created by Robert Eggman. So on the left is Triune and on the right is Oliver. And so Robert Eggman was a sculptor who was really interested and known for his planar sculptures that explored the balance between volume and line. And so you can really see that, at least with Triune, you really get a sense of its curves, but then also it, even in this study form, it's mass. And then with Robert Eggman's Oliver, and I should also add that Oliver is the name of the son of the man who commissioned this work at the College of William and Mary. And so that's why it's called Oliver. It has nothing to do with its form necessarily. But if you look at its form, you'll see that there are tons of stainless steel rods. And so this was one of Eggman's first of his stainless steel rod sculptures. And then I've also just included what their actual, what they turned out to be beyond their studies. And so Triune on the left is in Center City. If you've ever been to City Hall in Philadelphia, it is right on the corner of, or it's by Gerard Bank, I see. I'm not familiar with the street names, but it's right there. You can't miss it. And again, just thinking about, though this section is on materiality, as you can see in this photo, and as many of you know, Triune is situated within an urban environment, and many of Eggman's sculptures are situated in Philadelphia, like UPenn's campus, for instance. And so really, Eggman is not only working with these metals or other materials associated with industry or the urban environment, but he's really working within it and really thinking about his work within these spaces. Oliver, on the other hand, is at the College of William and Mary. And as I mentioned earlier, Oliver is named after the chancellor named after the son of the chancellor who had commissioned this work to begin with. And then to end this section on materials, I wanted to highlight a transition in Schatz's practice in making sculpture. And so she wanted to continue making minimalist sculpture, but then after she graduated, she realized that she didn't have the same access to resources or the space as she had when she was at the Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia. And so she was really thinking about, how can I continue to create the forms and the shapes, the structure that I'm interested in, but on a budget. And so that questioning led her to PVC pipes. And so this image is just an example of an installation of her pipe environments, as she liked to call them. And so as you can see in this image, she really configured them in so many different ways, whether it's like in a pyramid shape or in a square. But not only did they come in so many different types of configurations, but she really played with color as well. She would cut out these these color filters and place them at one end of a PVC pipe. And as you can see in like the middle structure or the middle sculpture, it really creates this beautiful, almost like another 2D work in itself within a sculpture. And so really, Schatz experimented with such a wide range of these materials. And I'll also mention that really at the time that Schatz was creating these works, she was really pioneering in a male-dominated expertise in artistic training. Usually these materials were associated with male artists. And so for Schatz to really be engaged with these materials is really pioneering and really huge for her time, and for other women artists to come. And so next, we'll talk about sites of industry. So now we're really thinking about the actual buildings. And as you look at this slide, you might be thinking, Abby, this is not a site of industry. And I will say to you, you're right, it's not. This is a lavender field in France. But I wanted to use this painting because it is a very important work in the transition of Schatz's practice yet again. So during this time, in the 1990s, Schatz had listened to a series of talks on the toxicity of these different materials that she was using, whether it's plastic or whether it's the metals. And so she wanted to switch and pivot again to a different media, to a different form of making, again, still these compositions that she was interested in. And so she had taken a sabbatical to France and was really inspired by all the colors and the colors and the compositions there. And so, so she took this trip to France in 1996, and then she bought a postcard and she painted this painting from that postcard. And as Cheryl Harper notes in the exhibition text and in the catalog, you can really tell, you can tell that she's already thinking again still about the urban landscape. The fields of lavender recall that form of the pipes that she had worked with on a three-dimensional level, right? And so you could see, even though this is a natural scene, it's a landscape, right? You can see the seeds that were planted for her future paintings of abandoned factories and industrial sites. And so began Schatz's time of painting different abandoned factories or different sites. And so when she would drive daily from her home in Elkins Park to her Philadelphia studio, she would drive along I-95 and see all of these different sites on her route. And so they really captured her attention and again, really sparked her, or just continued to feed into her interest in minimalist forms and geometric shapes. And so she began depicting all of these. And so part of what she depicted are specific industries. So for instance, in these two works, we see different angles of the Jack Frost Sugar Refinery. And so the one on the left is in our permanent collection as well. And the other one is on loan to us. And she often depicted breweries and alcohol distillation machinery. And so on the left, we have the Ortlieb's Brewery hopper, and then on the right is the Second Street hopper. But not only did she depict specific industries, but she was also just interested, as I said, in the form of these different, factories and abandoned buildings. And so here you could see the repetition of that cylinder form between silos and willow steam. And again, right, if we can remember from the pipe environments, you can see how she is recalling the structure and the sculpture of the pipe environments in these two paintings. She has one work where, so in the previous slides, the pipe environments were sort of on their side, but she had made a more monumental pipe environment where the different PVC pipes were stacked vertically in the same way that silos is depicted. And so again, she's still really interested in these forms. And then Willow Street Steam, again, as we can see, that really the focal point are those chimneys. And here she's depicting the Willow Street Steam Generation plant at 9th and Calloway Hill Streets in Philadelphia. And then this interest in form and composition also later influenced her work on these water combines or water towers. And really, these works are really interesting because this is when she really began digitally manipulating her images. So and I'll talk about her process in a little bit, but what she would do is that she would take these images or take these photographs of water combines, and then she would use digital scans in Adobe Photoshop to overlap the images, or she would take and then she would also do line drawings and overlap those line drawings as well. And so you can kind of see that layering effect in the water combines where you can, like, is it just one combine? Is it two? Right? You can sort of see there's something in the foreground and there's something behind it, but there's something that tells us it's one and the same in the fact that the colors from beneath come to the forward or to come to the foreground. And so again, Schatz is interested in this combined form, but not just the form, but really thinking about the play and the layering of color that mimics the layering digital process that she had used to create these. And so while I am talking about her work on urban ruins, and which is the title of this series, as well as just sites of industry in general, I thought it would be useful and worth just talking about her process. And so first, so pictured here is the title image of our show. But here she is pictured at Bethlehem Steel, which is one of her, which she had painted a series of paintings of. And so first she would go to these sites and take photographs, and sometimes she would trespass these sites. But she would go and she would find a composition that she liked, and she would take an image of it with her camera. And so she would take pictures like these. And then the next thing she would do is that she would create like a line drawing or just a simple sketch of it. And so here again, it's Bethlehem Steel, the place where she was at in the previous photo. And as you can tell, she thinks about what to include and what not to include. And so even though, so we can see these repeating roof lines, but the chimneys aren't there. And so she's very purposeful in what she includes and what she doesn't include. And then after that is the final painting. So here is Bethlehem Steel number 3, rooftops. And so I have highlighted here to pair with Schatz's paintings of industrial sites. I have a few paintings from the Commonwealth Gallery that also reflect the artist's interests in how industry plays out in the landscape. And so here we have a local scene of Bucks County by painter Red Miller. And so he painted a local lace factory that is situated along the Delaware River. And as you can see, it also recalls a similar, also features a similar palette, colorful and bright palette that Schatz has in her work. And so I just thought that was a really neat and tight comparison to make between Schatz's work and Miller's work. But then not only do we have local themes of industry, but we have artists who are also interested in depicting these industrial scenes elsewhere in the Delaware Valley region or outside. And so on the left is a painting by Walter Emerson Baum. So this is South Side Easton. So Easton, Pennsylvania was where Baum taught at Lafayette College, but it was also an important commercial center in the early 1900s. And so you can see it stood at the confluence of the Delaware and Lehigh rivers. And so you can see a lot of transportation sort of just met there. And so you can see how Baum depicted that with the railroads and the steam coming from the railroads. And then on the right, we have a very, very tiny painting done by George Sauter. It's actually a study for a larger painting. But George Sauter is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And being from Pittsburgh, he witnessed and he was really surrounded by iron and steel production that was really predominant there. And so in this painting, he really captures the action and the drama of iron and steel production. And you can really see how the really bright and orange fire in the front so starkly contrasts the night sky. And so you can really feel that, and you can see the emissions too, aglow from the fire. And so you can really see how Sauter really depicts really industry at play. And so I also wanted to include these because, right, compared to the abandoned factories that Schatz would depict and right after abandoned, so really thinking how they're after the fact of industrial production. And even compared to Brad Miller's depiction of the lace factory, which is still very idyllic in its composition, despite the way that it features industry. What Walter Emerson Baum's painting does and what George Sauter's painting does, it really shows us just like the concept, or we can imagine the consequences of industry in the way that these emissions rise to the sky. And it really calls to mind the environmental impact of factory activity. And so that will close out our section on industry. And now I want to pivot to thinking about how Schatz and other artists depicted non-industrial sites. So really thinking about what does city life look like on a residential level. And so featured here is Flatiron Building #1. This is in our permanent collection. And when I saw this painting, I thought this was the Flatiron Building that's really famous in New York. But then I looked it up again, and this is the one in Northern Liberties, the Northern Liberties neighborhood in Philadelphia, so not the one in New York. But again, even though Schatz is pivoting to a different type of building, she still has, still employing that same vibrant color palette. I'm still interested in minimalist forms. And so that is what you'll see here in Flatiron Building. And as I mentioned earlier, many of the work on display right now in the Commonwealth Gallery fit within this category of really just depicting urban life on a very general level, on a residential level. And so here are two examples of that. And they were featured earlier in the presentation. So on the left is City Street by Jessie Drew Bear. Jessie Drew Bear has a very playful style. Her story is very fun as well. She was gifted a painting set or an art set when she was in her 60s by her daughter. And since then, she learned how to paint. And she really was very determined to build an artistic career and really built a wonderful body of work. And so we received this one from a generous donor. And so in this scene, it's not depicting a specific factory or anything like that, but really just what a generic city street could look like. And she, in her playfulness, draws windows in a very simple style, overlays them on top of a brighter color that you can see coming through to the bottom. And you can see the energy in the simplicity of her lines as she depicts the city street. And then on the right, we have a painting by Humbert Howard. And so Humbert Howard was a Black artist who is notably the former director of the Pyramid Club, which is a prominent African-American social and arts and culture club in Philadelphia that operated in the 20th century. And according to his daughter-in-law, this scene depicts a view of Philadelphia from his studio. And so you can tell sort of that bird's eye. So that's why you can feel like it's coming from a bird's eye view. You can see how small the people are on the street side, and there's another person sort of above the horizon line in the center there. But previously, before he was a full-time artist, he had worked as a mailman in Philadelphia, and so he knew the streets of the city very well. And so that's how it figures prominently in works like these. And so in addition to buildings, I also wanted to think about transportation, as travel was an important part of this urban lifestyle. And so here I'll have a few paintings of trains, essentially, that we have featured in our gallery right now. So this is Train Station by Mildred Bunting Miller. Mildred Bunting Miller was a female painter who was trained in the style of the Pennsylvania Impressionists. And so we have this work by her and then two others by her in our permanent collection. But she's really well known for the way that she depicts light off of surface. And you can see that in the way that she treats like the steam coming from the train. But in 1914, as she was a student at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, she was awarded the prestigious Crescent Traveling Scholarship, which allows students to travel and study art in Europe. And so trains were frequently her mode of transportation as she toured through Britain, France, and Belgium. And so really it figured prominently in this part of her artistic career, as well as other urban lifestyle. And then here is the final painting of a train/train station, but I also wanted to use it as a transitional painting into our last section on urban change. And so this is a painting by Frederick Wagner. He was really interested actually in depicting modes of transportation in cities. And so he actually painted a lot of train stations and trains in general. And so this is a painting of the former Broad Street station. And so even though I'm using this painting as an example to explain urban change, I did not begin thinking about this painting in terms of change. As we were thinking about what paintings to pull from our storage to put on display, we came across this painting and its title really intrigued me. It's called Chinese Wall at Broad Street Station. And I was wondering why it was called the Chinese Wall, and I was wondering if there was any racial history in Philadelphia that needed to be unpacked there in the wall label. And so, and I should also preface that there had been no research previously done on this painting, at least in our files. And so as I dug through the internet and just learned more about this station, I learned that the answer to that question of its connection to Philadelphia's racial history is yes and no. And so basically the Chinese Wall is depicted in both photos, but you can really see the wall in the photo on the left. So the Chinese Wall was the former Pennsylvania Railroad viaduct. And so this viaduct connected the former Broad Street station, and you'll see the facade in the photo on the right. It connected that former Broad Street station to the surrounding areas across the Schuylkill River. So if you can imagine, if you've been to Philadelphia, you can think of where 30th Street Station is right now, and how that, overlooks the Schuylkill River, and how on the other side of the Schuylkill River is City Hall. The Pennsylvania Viaduct would have crossed the Schuylkill River in that same direction. And so that was what it was doing, and that was what the structure was made. It was made to connect those two disparate areas. And so it did that, but what ended up happening was, in addition to connecting these two parts of Philadelphia, the wall became such a formidable presence in the city that it blocked a lot of real estate from developing, or further real estate from developing in the city. And it ended up resulting in the formation of a barrier between socioeconomic classes in Philadelphia. And so, in a way, the use of the Chinese Wall as a term was not only to describe how large it was, but also but in a way it was derogatory, because it was thought of in a negative sense as this barrier between these two different communities in Philadelphia. And then ultimately, the viaduct was demolished in 1953, so it's no longer there. So in many ways, Frederick Wagner's painting is an archive of a former train station, of a former structure in the city. And Schatz' work also reflects this in a way. So in addition to all of the abandoned factories that Schatz depicted, she also depicted this brewery called Schmidt's Brewery. And so this is probably what most likely is the facade of the brewery. But then unfortunately, Schmidt was demolished in 2000. Nevertheless, Schatz created a collage of her photographs and paintings after the site had been demolished. And then this work is done by, not Schatz actually, but this is done by her former student, Gregory Sholett, who is now an artist and professor himself. And he took these different images of the former Schmidt's Brewery, entitled it Schmidt's is Gone. So really thinking about how Schmidt's had once existed, and now it exists in an archive, and really records in the same way that Schatz's painting records what it looked like in its full view when it was built up. Here, Gregory Sholett looks at the demolition of this brewery in steps, and really capturing that urban change in this accordion fold project. And so I didn't want to end on a sad note by thinking about the demolition of buildings with urban change and the rise and fall of buildings, but I wanted to conclude by thinking about sort of the flip side of change. When we think of change, right, it's very dynamic. And that essentially is what the urban environment is. And so my hope for this presentation and my hope that I leave you all with is really not only is the urban environment so dynamic in itself as one lives in it, and as it changes, right, as buildings come and go, but it is also a very dynamic subject matter for artists. As you can see, it was a constant inspiration for Schatz in the way that she reflected that dynamism in her own compositions, but also for the other artists in our collection as they were inspired in their own works. And so that concludes my presentation, and I would be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Okay, Abby, thank you. That was fabulous. Learned so much. Boy, this anonymous attendee asked exactly what I was going to if they hadn't. They said, what is your favorite work that you've discussed today?
Oh, that's a great question. Let me look at my notes.
And Alice basically asked the same one. She said, what one or several of these pieces speak to you the most? So I guess you can pick a couple.
I can pick a couple. I really do love Charlotte Schatz's painting. I think I can just flip back to PPG Portland. I think I think they're just really fun. I have no other deep thoughts other than the fact that they're really fun. And I think really seeing them in person, and I just think the way that we displayed them that's all of Joshua's design, Joshua, our director of exhibition, and how he put them against that black wall and how they just pop against that wall. I just think it's so well done. And there's so much liveliness in all of these paintings on these abandoned buildings. And so in general, I really am such a huge fan of her paintings. But from our permanent collection, that's a great question. I think as a curator and as you learn more about these paintings, I feel like this is such a complex answer, but I think all of them begin to speak to you. But I think I would say, I guess now that I'm lingering over it, I must talk about it. But I do love these two works a lot. And I was able to connect with Humbert Howard's daughter-in-law. And so I think just that connection as well has given this painting, or both these paintings, a lot more meaning to me. But again, I love the vibrancy. I love just the layers of city that you can see in it, and the way that they rendered these cities in very unique ways to their artistry is what I really love about them.
I will say that it's definitely, you have to see these in person. I mean, as with all art, but the one by Jessie Drew Bear is so fascinating. The vagueness of the paintings and the buildings in the background, and then how she drew the little windows. It's amazing to me. Anyway, I could stand in front of this. Now we have so many more questions. Hold on, let me ask. Alice wanted to know if there was anything that you discovered in your research that you found most interesting or surprising.
That's a good question as well. I think the research on Frederick Wagner's painting was really interesting to me. And I'll go back to that painting. Yeah, I think this was really, I just had no idea about this city history. And I had no idea that there was this whole other Broad Street station. Because I went to college in Bryn Mawr, and so I was able to go into the city pretty frequently. And so I had been a frequent user of the SEPTA train system. And so to learn that there was this other train station that was formerly there was really surprising to me. And the fact that you can even see City Hall in the painting. I don't know, it felt like such a precious time capsule that we have in our collection. And so I think that was really surprising to me. But I think also, actually, I really enjoyed reading the life of Mildred Bunting Miller. So if anyone is interested, we have a library at the Michener, and it's by appointment only. But we have in our library collection a biography of Mildred Bunting Miller. And as I was preparing to write the labels for train station, and previously we were planning to have another painting by her on display, but we ended up nixing it from the checklist. I read through the biography, and she just had it was just very interesting to really get to know what a person was thinking and what their upbringing is. I think as a curator, you can only do such surface level research of artists and their paintings, but I think just to get the opportunity to read a little bit about her biography, it was just really fun to get to know her upbringing, her education at PAFA, her romance life, her subsequent teaching at PAFA summer school. And so I would say that was also a really neat surprise as I was doing research.
I envy, I ask you to do these programs selfishly, but I think you enjoy them as well.
You're not wrong.
So we have a question from Diana, wants to know if you can speak a bit about Charlotte Schatz's choice of colors.
That's a great question. I feel like I can't say too much beyond the fact that she was really inspired by all the colors that she saw in France, and how vibrant the landscapes there were, and what they looked like when she applied it to paint. But I think maybe one other thing I can say is that even though she transitioned into such a vibrant color palette for these paintings, you can see sort of the seeds of that through her pipe environments. Like when we remember even though her sculptures were minimalist, the way that she would play with color, even with her pipe environments and with the color filters, I feel like one can make an educated guess, or one can presume and argue that really the start of that interest in colors and that color palette began even before France. And so that's just my hypothesis, but I don't know too much about like if she had a favorite color that she liked to use, or which colors that she liked to pair the most. That I'm not too sure of.
Okay. Alice, thank you for this wonderful presentation. She learned so many interesting things. I second that. Another question. Did Schatz or any of these other artists ever paint industrial or city scenes that had been rehabilitated? For example, Bethlehem steel stacks after the rehab.
Oh, that's a good question. I am not too sure, actually. I'm familiar with I feel like many of them ended up being demolished. And she would take photos of these sites as they were being actively demolished. It was to the point where the construction workers who were there, and we have this hat on display, but they had given her a complimentary hard hat because she was taking photos as the site was being demolished. But I would be interested to learn as well as for other artists who depicted sites after rehab. I can't say that I know of any at the top of my head, but that would be a good line of inquiry to follow.
Okay, a question from Tom. I really like the paintings of factories, especially those of Bethlehem, where I was born and raised. Do you consider Schatz's work abstract? They really don't depict the buildings as I saw them growing up.
I would definitely consider them abstract. And as I was thinking about the presentation, I was wondering if I should talk about, or even just have a section in the presentation about abstraction, because a lot of the works in the Commonwealth Gallery are like we really dedicate, we like sort of organized one corner of it around this experimentation with abstraction. But then I was like, oh, that's not an urban environment. I can't, I won't force it. But definitely I would say that she has been like, or I think like scholars or curators have labeled her work as minimalist, and then also neo-precisionist. And so precisionist refers to the style of painting in which you really condense a subject matter to its essential forms. Um, and so someone labeled her work as such, and I think that is what she is trying to do, where she is just taking like a building, for instance, a very complex building. I think factory buildings are very complex, but really just taking its essential shapes and forms and putting that on a painting. So absolutely, I think her work is abstract.
Great. And we have one final question from Judith. Are other members of the Schatz family artists?
Oh, that's a good question. I am not familiar whether or not they are, but they all have an active hand in um, keeping her art and really cultivating her memory. But to my understanding, I can't think of, I think she might have been the only one in her family who was an active artist, but I might be wrong.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Abby. This has been fascinating. And um, I love all the bright colors that are used in these industrial landscapes. It's always interesting to me.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, Scott, one last comment. Wonderful, wonderful presentation, Abby. So thank you again. Thank you everyone that attended. This was recorded and will be put on our YouTube channel. So I will send out that link to everyone that registered. We have you be sure to stop by and see the exhibit. Charlotte Schatz is on display. Abby, remind me, through the end of March.
Through the end, yes, because we'll begin installing the next show during that time.
So through the end of March, it is definitely a little gem. It's bright and cheerful and wonderful to check out, especially on these dreary days that we have coming ahead. And we also will have a gallery talk with Laura. We'll be talking about the Charlotte Schatz exhibit. More information is on our website. So thank you again, Abby. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a great evening. Bye, everyone.